Hey folks, welcome back to the TheByteBit, and in today's video, this is actually video 2 of the admin and maintenance series for Linux, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the first one. I will link to it in the description below if you'd like. It really goes over logging into the system, the terminal, looking at the host name, network, and CPU, free disk space, and all of that good stuff. Really, the goal of this series that I really want to kind of point across or mention is that it really should get you used to monitoring and working with a Linux system. Now, it may not look like this, it may not even have a GUI, but you should feel comfortable to it, especially if your role or your job demands that you do. There's a lot of video tutorials out there on the net, including on YouTube and other sites, that kind of show you piecemeal how to work with certain aspects of the operating system, and it's great. But I haven't really come across one that is free that kind of goes over how to kind of maintain the system or even just monitor it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis should your job call for it. So hopefully you guys got some useful tips and tricks out of the first video, and we're going to continue with video number 2. In this video, we're going to take a look at, or at least start with, taking a look at the uptime command. And as you can tell, I've actually logged into the system already. And I've also opened up a terminal window here. And if I type in the uptime command, it's a single line of text, but it is very important. And again, it gives you kind of a snapshot of what the system is doing in certain respects. And it really helps you get a feel for, issues that might be on the verge of occurring. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first bit here, and essentially you can see that this is the current time of the machine, 1842. It is in military time, so 6:42, and it's been up for 4 days. As far as the uptime goes, which is actually quite important for many admins and many users, what you'll see is that two schools of thought come into play, right? Servers that have an uptime of just a day or a couple of minutes and get rebooted every day kind of should raise a flag. Why is this physical server or virtual machine being rebooted every day? Is there a necessity for that to occur, right? And if there is a legitimate reason, then that's great. You can note it down and move on with life. It also may be that you come up to a virtual machine or a physical server that you're now supposed to be in charge of, and you see that the uptime is 500 days. Or 2 years, right? Which I have seen in the course of my work time, and that should also raise a flag. It's great that it's been up for 2 years, but has any updates been applied? Has the kernel been updated that requires a reboot? I mean, is there a reason why the server has been running for 2 years, say, and not been rebooted? I've actually had an instance whereby I've come across a server that I needed to patch, and I looked at the uptime and I saw that it was well over 2 years actually, which is why they made a request to patch it. And upon discussing it or speaking with the original admin or the previous admin, I found out that there was an app running on the box that they weren't sure would start back up again if they rebooted the virtual machine. It was a proprietary app. It was a legacy app that they had been designed and built in-house, but the developer had left, and so they weren't really sure what to do in case the app didn't start back up. Long story short, they just kept the server running and crossed their fingers that nothing would happen. So again, a short uptime can be a red flag. A long uptime can also be a red flag, and you want to be aware of that, especially if now this server is in your lap and you are responsible for its uptime. Okay, it also shows you the number of users that are physically connected to the system, and right now it shows one user. In fact, if I type in the word who or the command who, it shows me that the TheByteBit is connected. There's only one user here. That's great. And then you can also see the load average. This is the CPU load average that it's discussing. Very important. The 3 sets of numbers that you see here correlate with intervals. The first one is a 1-minute interval. The second one is a 5-minute interval, and the third is a 15-minute interval. And really what this is showing you is how busy or what's the workload that the CPU is currently performing or under. And so if you see 1.00 in any of these numbers or any of these sets of numbers, but basically it should tell you that the CPU or the processor core is actually running at 100%. Now, that may be okay. Again, this may be a heavy-duty workhorse. It's a SQL server. It's an Apache Tomcat server. Whatever the reason is, it may be okay that you see those high numbers. You may also see some numbers in here that, you know, are in the range of maybe 5.00 or 8.0 or 9.00, depending on how many cores are on this box and how many are being utilized. Now let me make another point here about that. If I actually type in lscpu, which is a command I went over in video 1, you can actually scroll up and you can see the socket, and you can also see the cores per socket. So essentially what this tells me is that it has one CPU, right, virtual in this case because it's VMware, and it has 2 cores to that socket. Okay, and so if I come in here and I take a look at the uptime again, let me just clear this out. So if I come in here and I see that this is at 1.50, that may be fine. That may not be cause for concern. Again, take stock of how this virtual machine is built, what resources have been assigned to it, and what's the load that the CPUs have to work under. And if you see it constantly spiked over a 1 minute, 5 minute, 15-minute interval, over days, weeks, you really need to bring that up with the hardware folks, with the users, the front-end users, see what's going on, and if you need to rebuild this box, add more resources, you know, and the like. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of the uptime command here, and let's go ahead and move on with the next. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at logging. Now, logging is incredibly useful, of course. It's important for any sysadmin because it's going to show you what's going on behind the curtain, and you can get an idea of system issues, and you can hopefully avoid any catastrophes that force you to be there all weekend long trying to get the system up and running. Now, I want to start by showing you the directory I'm in. It's actually var/log, and this is the directory you need to familiarize yourself with because it's going to be where 99% of the logs will live. This is for the system, the kernel, the hardware, daemon or services, and pretty much everything else. Now, you may have some other locations whereby third-party apps use for logging, and that's fine. I mean, that's one-off that you can kind of keep in your back pocket or on your OneNote so you can kind of reference when you need. Speaking of which, if you do inherit a server, a Linux box that's, you know, one or multiple roles, even with third-party software installed, maybe even some homegrown or home-brewed software, you really want to speak to the developers and get the locations they go to when they need to troubleshoot, because it'll help you, you know, on a Friday night at, you know, at 1 o'clock in the morning if you're trying to fix some problem. You know, at least you can reference a location, try to do a bit of research on your own, and hopefully get the system up and running. So varlog is incredibly important, and you really need to look into that directory. I'm going to go ahead and start by typing the ls command here, and you can see that there are a bunch of logs or a bunch of files listed here. Some that are open logs, just, you know, that are not compressed, some that are actually compressed or gzipped, that you might need to reference as well. Now, this will definitely look different for your system, and that makes sense. In fact, there may even be some name changes that you need to be aware of. Here's an example. You can see that in the Ubuntu version or the Ubuntu Linux that I'm running here, Syslog is the main log. It's the catch-all. It's going to have data from multiple sources in there. And so ideally, you might want to check that first, right? And that makes sense. However, if you're running a Red Hat /CentOS version or distro of Linux, you'll need to go to the messages file, because that's going to be the equivalent in their operating system or their release. And so getting familiar with the version of the OS, which we did in the first video, really kind of builds upon the rest of the series, whereby you kind of know ahead before what you're dealing with and where to look and what to look at. Okay, so here are the logs in the system in this varlog directory, and I'm going to touch on some of the major ones that I think you ought to at least look at initially to get your bearings for the box. So let's go ahead and take a look at syslog here. I'm going to go ahead and type in cat syslog. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually saying print out the contents of the syslog to the screen. If I hit enter, you can see that I've got a bunch of data, right? Far too much data to go through. I mean, it's perfect for bedtime reading when you can't fall asleep, but, you know, during work hours, it's not really going to help you. You've got a bunch of stuff to do. Okay, let's clear that and get the contents back. What I recommend doing is I actually just recommend either doing a cat on the log with the less command. So I'll say cat syslog pipe command less. And what this is saying in layman's terms is take the, I want you to print the contents of this file, but instead of going to the screen right away, first send it to this command, the less command. And the less command is just going to print out line by line of the file to the screen. So I'll hit enter, and you can see that it's printed out the first number of lines to the screen, and then as I hit the enter key, it starts printing out more lines from the file. Great, this may be useful for you, but as you can tell, I'm only on November 15th, and if I hit Control Z and get out of it and type in date, I'm at November 28th. So that may not be the most logical thing to do. Okay. Let's clear that out and get the contents back. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the tail command. The tail command is incredibly useful for situations like this, because not only can you get the last number of lines or the first number of lines, or rather the reverse order of them, of a particular file, you can actually monitor the file in real time. Let me show you that process here. So if I say tail without any other short commands or attributes or flags, and I'll say syslog, what it does is it prints out the last 10 lines by default of the file. And you can see here November 28th going up in time frame here. And I can see what's going on, something about the domain, DHCP, network manager scripts trying to run, the mdispatcher here, network manager dispatcher, and then I can go from there. Okay, if I can actually grow that by the number of lines I want, that would be helpful, and that's exactly what you can do with the tail command. So if I say tail dash 100 syslog, it'll print out the last 100 lines of the log file. Much easier for me to handle, read through, and go forth, right? I can also tail this log file if I know an issue is occurring and maybe catch something in real time. And that I would do by the -F, which is basically follow in the Ubuntu world, right, for this tail command. So if I say tail syslog -F, what that's going to do is I still see the blinking cursor, but I don't have the command prompt, right? And that's because it's quote-unquote following the log file. And if an error were to occur, or if a message were to come into the system, then what would happen is I would see that print on the screen right away. And having this open while I have the user, attempt the command again or the task again will just help me narrow down the problem. So very useful to keep with you. And I'm just going to hit Control C to break and get back to the login prompt here. Okay, so now that the tail command has been discussed, I also want to talk about looking at certain or specific messages in the log, right? Let's go back and clear the screen, and I'm going to say cat syslog. I'm going to say I'm going to use the pipe command, and I'm going to say grep, which is basically the command to filter out the contents of a particular file in this case, and I'm going to say grep the syslog file and show me anything that has error in it. And as you can tell, it's brought back the error messages for me, right? And I can get an idea of the time frame, the who, what, where, when, and why kind of deal. Or maybe not the why. I would have to extrapolate the why, but at least you have something to go on. In like fashion, I can delete error and I can say failed. And I can get a bunch of failed messages here, and I can even do an output of this to a particular file that I can send to maybe a network manager or a system developer or hardware, depending on what the errors are that you see. So you can also kind of go by your desired type of error, right, or message. So apart from failed, I can also say info. And this has a bunch of information here that I can scroll through and take a look. As I said, the syslog is the sort of catch-all here, and you're going to get data from many points. In fact, you can see I have network data here. Before I was looking at other segments of the system. So I can do that, but I also want to talk about the overflow. So let's go ahead and say clear, and I'll hit ls here. And you can see that I've got syslog, then syslog.1, then .2, .3, .4, but also gz. All this is indicating to me is that there are a bunch of logs, system logs, that have been generated over the course of time, and the operating system has sort of taken those logs and put them into a backup log and gzipped or compressed them, so it can keep only the most current events in the main system log here, right? So in order for me to look at the contents of this file, these files here, which are compressed and backed up, I would have to use the zcat and then the file name. And I'll again pipe that to less, and you can see that it automatically on the fly will uncompress that file and show me the contents as I need it. Now you may be asking yourself, well, okay, they're just numbered. How would I kind of know which one to go with? Well, in order to do that, you want to kind of filter the contents of this folder differently. If I say ls-lrt, what that's going to do for me is a number of different sorting mechanisms, but more ideally, it's going to time or list them chronologically based on time accessed. So you can see that the syslog is the file that was most recently accessed, followed by kernel, authorization, DP package, alternatives, and so on. Okay, and knowing that kind of gives you an idea of the system and how it's performing and which one gets used, but you can also get an idea of the time frame for these logs. So what I can then go to the user and say is, okay, when did the issue occur? Did it happen on November 10th? Okay, then I would come in and get this log. I would just copy this log out, and I would say zcat and paste out the log here. Oh, let's do that here. syslog.6 and get the contents of it and read through and see what happened. Okay, I'll hit Control-C here. So there are a number of different ways to kind of approach the log based on what the log is, what its primary function is, and how you want to go about reading it. Again, you do have GUIs. You can go in and take a look at a beautiful front-end application that will do all of the sorting and functionality for you, but I want to focus on the terminal because, after all, it is going to be available regardless of the distribution or installation of Linux you have. Now let's go and take a look at some of the other logs here before we conclude the video. And another log that's important is the kernel.log. This is the log that will basically show you the events from the kernel. Where this comes into play is if you have a custom built kernel. So if you're running on, if you're administering or monitoring or maintaining a server, Linux box that had a custom built kernel, you really want to keep an eye on this file because it'll kind of give you the ins and outs of what's going on, and you may be able to find out if there are any issues that are on the horizon that you need to take a look at. So that's a kernel log here. And then I also want to take a look at the dmessage log. The dmessage log is a log that will show you the boot up sequence, and it's very, very important because obviously when you're booting up a box, you really don't have time to read through, the thousands of lines that come up, and you really, won't be able to read through because it happens so quickly. So really, after the fact, if you want to find out what's going on, you can actually use the command. So you can say dmessage, and you can say -h, which is human readable, and it'll print out all of the contents of the file for you, and you can kind of go through and see how the system booted up and if there are any issues that you needed to, be aware of or fix. So let me just kill that here real quick. So again, same concept here. If I type in dmessage, you can see that it's got a bunch of data, including the source, and help you find out where an issue took place, especially if the boot up process had a problem. So very important to know. All right, let's go back in here and let's see. Is there anything else that we should look at in terms of this? No, I think that pretty much covers it. You can see that the kernel.log also has logs that they use for overflow. It's log.1, log.2, and as I said before, the system.log or the syslog is really the most important one, where you want to kind of keep an eye on and go from there. All right, so that pretty much covers the messages as well as the uptime for this particular video, the second video in the series. And I hope you guys found this useful and informative, and I thank you for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.